In the Romulus faction of Weyland-Yutani's Renaissance space station, experiments were taking place involving the facehuggers harvested by its science team. Within these parasitoids, according to the synthetic science officer Rook, was the key to mankind's salvation. Compound Z01, a new form of the pathogen previously known as chemical A0-3959X.91. The origins of its discovery trace back to the Prometheus project, headed by Peter Weyland on the moon LV-223. Ampules of the substance were farmed en masse by beings referred to as the Engineers, the possible creators of human life on Earth. The purpose of this installation and its use by the Engineers was debated, a haven for creation or for the purposes of mass destruction. But one thing was clear. Direct contact with this chemical had disastrous effects on humans. As evidenced through the cases of Dr. Holloway and geologist Fifield, the chemical caused unstable, unpredictable mutations that would ultimately result in a complete genetic breakdown. This ability showed its promise as a weapon. When in the hands of Weyland's synthetic, David 8, armed with a cargo of ampules on an engineer ship, an entire planet's life was wiped out almost immediately. David, however, became more interested in the pathogen's ability to create. During his years marooned on the unnamed Planet 4, new methods of delivering different forms of the pathogen were revealed. The first through spores, which when disturbed would emit the pathogen in the form of airborne motes, which would find and infect a host, implanting the makings of a new creature, the Xenomorph. Its host would display signs of infection, becoming violently ill before the creature's birth. The second, developed through David's experimentation, were through the eggs and facehuggers. An implantation with no visible signs of infection until birth, incredibly resilient and adaptive with regenerative abilities. Rook believed that the refined, synthesized form of the pathogen extracted from the parasitoids was finally the ideal match for human use, as per Rook. Our colonies are dying, unbearable temperatures, novel diseases every cycle, toxic mine fumes. It's all one unforeseen tragedy after the other. Mankind was never truly suited for space colonization. They're simply too fragile. They're too weak. The work of this station aimed to change that. The perfect organism. That's how we should refer to human beings. So I set this wrong right. I took its gift for humanity. Inside the parasitoids I bioengineered from the Xenomorph's DNA, I discovered a unique non-Newtonian fluid. Life. In its most primal, unadulterated form. This microorganism can be the most destructive pathogen ever observed. But acetylated and synthesized in our lab, I've turned it into the miracle Mr. Weyland died searching for. Prometheus Fire, the divine gift to humanity. Z01 contains the genome responsible for the Xeno's ability to accelerate and slow down its metabolism at will. Its symbiotic capableness easily rewrites the host DNA through its blood. This is a much-needed and well-overdue upgrade for humanity. We simply cannot wait for evolution anymore. Hastily conducted experiments were performed on the station's lab rats, but no time allowed to observe the long-term effects, nor for human testing. Fate would bring opportunity for a human test subject after the station's downfall. Kay, one of the fleeing colonists from Jackson's star. In an encounter with one of the xenomorphs on the station, she sustained severe life-threatening injuries. Encouraged by Rook, she was convinced to inject the Z01 compound into her bloodstream in order to save her life, and the life of the unborn child within her. Kay seemed to benefit from exactly what Z01 had been intended for. She was healed and alive, seemingly completely fine. However, the compound seemed to have an unexpected effect on the fetus growing within her. Awakened by terrible pain while in her hypersleep pod, the birth began. The offspring growing unbelievably fast, encased in a familiar alien-like cocoon. A new species was revealed. An unholy trinity of human, alien, and engineer. Referred to simply as the Offspring, this was one of the more controversial elements of Alien Romulus, but an undeniably fascinating contribution to the overall possibilities of the Xenomorph life cycle. After the film's release, director Fede Alvarez spoke of the creature and how it could be perceived in the larger scale of the series. The black goo is the root of all life, he says, but also particularly the xenomorphs come out of that thing, which means it has to be inside them. It's the xenomorph's semen, almost. So we thought if it affects your DNA, and the engineers clearly came out of the same root of life, it made complete sense to me that the offspring of a human and a xenomorph was going to look like that. It's probably a new species, because that mix never happened before. This indeed was a mix we've never quite seen before, and one that seemed to be changing with each passing moment. It begins on all fours, with a small tail and shifting armor plating. Possibly nourished to further growth by breastfeeding a further iteration of the compound taken from K, the creature's tail grew larger, and the enormous creature began to walk upright. Given its short life, and being defeated by Rain Carradine, is it possible the Offspring was undergoing further changes? Could it even have been transforming into a larger version of Xenomorph XX121? This may have been the original intentions when developing the Offspring behind the scenes. Periodically, concept artist Dane Hallett has been sharing some intriguing glimpses at the Offspring's metamorphosis on social media. Hallett has shared many different explorations of the creature, and as with many different concept artists, there were different designs and ideas that didn't make it into the final film. What seemed to grab the most interest from fans, though, is the art which depicts the Offspring's face tearing apart and revealing the Xenomorph skull underneath. Here's what Hallett had to say on his posts. At one point, the material Kay uses on herself has such a dramatic genetic effect on her unborn child that it grew into this monstrosity. It made it all the way to previs when it finally changed into something else before reverting back to just being the Offspring you saw in the final cut. Here's a paint-over of Legacy Effects' Offspring design as it appeared in the movie, done during post-production to show it gradually turning into a Xenomorph, mid-phase. You can kind of see the skeleton breaching the skin of the tail, molting, as the head elongates, collarbones grow to extrude, and the classic Xeno backpipes are making an appearance, etc. You would have seen it evolving in real time. The tail, the Xeno backpipes, and the vestigial eye sockets all taking shape as per Fede's idea to see it eventually become the Xenomorph. This was nerve-wracking. Was I going to be responsible for an unloved mutation in the alien universe? I tried desperately to give this thing purpose, presence, and making an ode to all that had come before it. In the end, I'm grateful we got what we got in the final cut, but here's what could have been. Clearly based on Hallett's art and comments, there was at some point an intention to present the Offspring undergoing this metamorphosis. But how far did this version get into the actual film? Apparently, this was included in early cuts of Alien Romulus seen by preview audiences. One such audience member was Mike Monahan, and on his YouTube channel Mike's Monsters, he shares his experiences in viewing this early cut. He has an excellent video outlining not just the Offspring scene, but many moments and scenes that didn't make it into the final film, well worth checking out. Here's what he had to say of the Offspring. There were some changes that physically went on with the Offspring as he was crawling around and chasing after Rain. You could see his body start to contort in different ways, and his shoulders were changing and growing. The back of his head started getting longer and longer, tubes started forming more, and he just started to look a little bit more Xenomorph-shaped. In his chase with Rain is when you really start to see his body growing and changing into this other form. It gets to the point where she does the acid with the egg and everything, and it sucks them down into space like we saw in the final version. But instead of her floating there, and it just jumps at her face and starts doing the secondary tongue and cracking the glass, it was basically just a camera pan over, and we see some fog clear out, and we see its face. But we see that the edges of the face, the skin is all ripped, and there's more of the body revealed, and then basically the skin falls off, and it's revealed to be a Xenomorph. The Offspring was going to turn into a full-grown, adult Xenomorph. Mike stresses that this was all rough, preliminary CGI, but gave a good enough idea of what the intentions were. Very recently, director Fede Alvarez has spoken out a little bit about this lost concept and confirmed it existed in earlier cuts. In his interview with this month's Empire magazine, Alvarez referenced Ridley Scott viewing an early cut, possibly the same or very similar cut seen by Mike Monahan. He revealed that Scott had some criticism of that aspect. Alvarez says, I remember asking him about the Offspring at the end, and he was like, didn't love it. In his defense, that was when he saw the first cut, and the first cut was slightly different. There was a progression of the design. My instinct was that you need to keep evolving. So the head starts to grow, and when we saw it outside the ship, it was almost turned into a Xenomorph. It was like the strongest DNA was winning. That was the cut he saw. He didn't like it. And what sealed the deal was, we screened the movie for Alex Garland, and Alex said, don't change the creature. Don't let it evolve into a Xenomorph. So we were very close to actually seeing something like that in the final film. If you consider that as a positive, then you have Ridley Scott and Alex Garland to thank. But it is interesting that this was the original idea, and that there was an attempt to include it in the film. I would say, though, that even though this wasn't in the final cut, this still could be something implicit, some kind of change that was happening within the Offspring that we just didn't see. What exactly this says of the nature of this new creature and the purposes of Z01 may be less clear. This calls into question the motives of Rook, who, on the surface, seemed to genuinely want mankind to progress and believed the compound would help. But was his idea of the perfect organism an enhanced human being, or was it the Xenomorph all along? He certainly wouldn't be the first android in this series to think so. Right from its release, one of the most divisive elements of Alien Romulus was the inclusion of the Offspring. Do you think including this transformation into a Xenomorph would have been for the better, or was it best left out in those earlier cuts? Comment below and share your thoughts. I'm curious to know. As always, I'd like to thank you very much for watching today. Please be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the latest from the channel. My very special thanks today goes out to Brandon James, Xenoshadowmorph, and Xenozip, Queen Tiers of the Patreon Hive. Thank you to Gregory Ford and John Griggs, the Hive's Praetorians. My very special thanks to Lady Anne in the Ellen Ripley Tier of Excellence. And thank you very much, Nicholas Butta and Frank, the Alien Theory Weyland-Yutani Executives. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page for further information. In the meantime, you can follow me on social media. Follow @alien_theory on X, formerly Twitter. Follow @alientheoryyt on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.